Mr. Schwarz, thank you so much for joining us here on WION. What kind of a dent do you think this is going to make for the Tories as well as Rishi Sunak just ahead of general elections in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think this is an astonishing misstep for Rishi Sunak's campaign, which, really from the very beginning, since we saw him give that rain-drenched election announcement outside 10 Downing Street, has really been blighted by so many different mishaps. But I think this is a particular problem for two reasons. The first is, I would say, that the Conservative voter base tends to be older and therefore has a more of a connection to the kind of Second World War generation. So I think for them that this will be an issue that particularly resonates with them. But secondly, Rishi Sunak, not even 2 weeks ago, announced this an idea of national service for the youth in the UK, where someone would be conscripted to the military for the first time, I think, since the 1950s. So, of course, we have the contrast of a prime minister who seems to be unwilling to take off a few hours or an afternoon to pay tribute to a generation that liberated Europe from tyranny, with the fact that he's trying to conscript the youth in the UK into that kind of service. So I think it's a major problem in terms of Rishi Sunak's image. As I mentioned, it has issues in terms of consistency, in terms of what he says. But I think primarily, it comes at a time when Rishi Sunak is actually really struggling in the polls. And generally in election campaigns, we tend to see the gap between the two main parties actually narrow. But actually what we've seen over the last couple of weeks has been that the gap has been widening. So I think this is a moment where Rishi Sunak really, if he is ever going to turn things around or at least limit the damage, needs to do so. But unfortunately, he seems to be blighted on a day-to-day basis by missteps or errors of judgment or, other sort of things that we would consider gaffes.
The polls that you're talking about, that's exactly what I wanted to come to, because even if we take this misstep aside, the opinion polls are not in favor of the Tories. And I know there's just a month to go for the elections, but do you think at this point, bring in your perspective, do you think at this point the Tories can do anything to make things change for the voters?
I think fundamentally the Conservatives know that they cannot win this election. Really, the only thing they can do is try to ensure that there's not a total wipeout. But of course, that relies upon the campaign going much more smoothly than it has done. We still have a month to go in this election, and it already feels like a lifetime in the last couple of weeks. And so, of course, the Conservatives' election chances have got even worse over the last week since we saw the return of Nigel Farage, who, of course, competes with the same voter base as the Conservatives on the right wing. So I think it's very unlikely, looking at the polls, that they could really narrow them in any kind of meaningful way. But I think, primarily, there is an issue in the UK of election campaigns becoming more presidential in nature, with more of a focus on the leader. And we've certainly seen that from Rishi Sunak's campaign. And so, with Sunak being so sort of gaffe prone and so many errors of judgment, there is a particular problem where the emphasis on that one individual, where that one individual is making so many mistakes. So I think really Sunak needs to kind of steady the ship. But I think really it's kind of a foregone conclusion. Really, the main issue at the moment is just how devastated is the Conservative Party going to be when the election result comes on 5th of July.